In 2011, Robert Lupton, founder of FCS Urban Ministries, released a book entitled Toxic Charity: How Churches and Charities Hurt Those They Help. In the book, Lupton argues that charity without transformation of the individual in need creates dependency, fosters disempowerment, and devastates entire communities. He claims that much of our climate for charity work is a one-way, giveaway approach that truly does more harm than good for the recipients, and mostly exists to make charitable givers feel good about themselves, to lessen any guilt they may feel as they witness the struggles of those less fortunate than themselves. Having been involved in charitable work my entire adult life, I agree with Lupton on some of his argument that some charity may be toxic, doing more harm than good. I will never forget, and perhaps you will not either, the charitable response of our nation to the terrorist acts of September 11th, 2001, when tons of clothing, stuffed animals, and junk was sent in truckloads to help the survivors and relatives who lost loved ones that day. Now, what's important here is that people didn't necessarily lose their possessions, but they did lose their loved ones that day. Most of what happened in the attacks of 9/11 had to do with commercial buildings and offices and, at the Pentagon and in the field, did not destroy people's homes, didn't take away their clothing and all of their personal belongings. And yet, tons and tons of clothing and stuffed animals and other things were sent to New York and other places. The outpouring of generosity was incredible and created a nightmare for the agencies and municipalities on the receiving end. It happens after every natural disaster as well. Mounds of used clothing given by well-meaning hearts, impossible to manage, and eventually headed to landfills, creating yet another environmental disaster on top of whatever has just happened. Often the best gift is a monetary gift through an agency that you know and trust, like Disciples' Week of Compassion. Their motto is stay, pray, and pay. Don't go get in the way of first responders and rescuers who are trained and those who are trained and prepare and plan for disasters. Stay, pray that God's healing spirit of recovery will be in their midst, and pay. Give a monetary donation through Week of Compassion or some other agency to help if that's what you choose to do. Anytime we are sending stuff to faraway places without specific requests for what we are sending, our charity may actually be toxic. I've had experience with several different charitable organizations over the years, including managing benevolence funds of congregations that I've served. And Lupton, in his book, claims that most local charitable giving and congregational charity is toxic as well, because the giveaway mentality serves the giver more than the receiver. If you've ever emptied a food drive bin, you may be able to relate to that claim. In my experience, I've found food with expiration dates as much as 5 years old in food collection bins over the years. And way too many olives, artichoke hearts, and the like make their way into the bins. Chances are, if you're not going to try it or not willing to eat it, the person at the food pantry will not either. The motivation may have been cleaning out the cabinet or pantry rather than true charity. And then all of that food has to go someplace. It goes to the food pantry, and at the food pantry, what we know is that about 50% of donated food gets thrown away because it's expired, way past date, those kinds of things. Not usable, it might be perishable or otherwise unusable. Well, beggars can't be choosers, some would say, and that is precisely what Lupton is addressing when he says that some charity is toxic to the very people it was designed to help. Human dignity is intact when we have the freedom to make choices for ourselves, even if the source is a gift. Think about it. When you receive a gift that you don't want, that you don't need, or you don't even like, you may return it, right? You may re-gift it to somebody else, or you may donate it to some charity, or you may even throw it away. The choice is yours as receiver of the gift. The same should be true in gifts of charity. To expect somebody to eat cream of asparagus soup because we found a can in the back of our pantry and gave it to the local food pantry is like throwing our scraps to the pigs. Truth is, hungry people have taste buds just like everyone else, and we honor their dignity when we grant them the freedom to choose what they eat. One of the things that I really like about our Blessings in a Backpack program is that a childhood nutritionist has chosen the menu of items we pack and send out based on what children and families will likely eat and have the resources to prepare. This is why we don't do general food drives for Blessings in a Backpack, and we do very specific food drives. And we have, even the size of the item makes a difference in our food drives. All of that is because we know that what we're sending is something that families are likely to use and be able to prepare. I'm sure there is something in every bag that we pack that the student who receives it doesn't like. And more than one item they do. I've shared before with you that when I've done open houses at schools or like the back to school bash, those kinds of festivals, and represented Blessings in a Backpack, I've had the opportunity and privilege to meet some of the children who receive our Blessings in a Backpack bags. They're always excited to see us, and they're always excited to see the display of food that we have out on the table. And it's been my joy to ask them, which one is your favorite? What do you like the most? And what I've been astounded by is that there hasn't been an item out of all the items that we send of 3 different menus that hasn't been chosen by a child as their favorite. You would think the chocolate pudding would be the number one favorite, or the fruit snacks would be the number one favorite. But one little girl came up and pointed to the can of tuna and said, "That's my favorite." One little boy came up and pointed to the can of refried beans and said, "That's my favorite." One child came up and pointed to the can of corn and said, "That's my favorite." So what we may think would be the case sometimes is different than what we would believe, right? And so I know that in every bag there's something that they're going to eat, they're going to like, I'm sure of that, and I'm sure there's something in there they might want to give to their little brother or sister because they don't like it, and maybe they'll eat it. Maybe their name is Mikey or something like that. When Lupton's book came out, some of my colleagues in ministry were quick to change their congregation's approach to charitable work based on his theory that giveaways are toxic without individual transformation. In other words, handing out free stuff over and over again to the same person without any change in that person may not do the most good and may even potentially do some harm. Well, I know I've been played, well, at least lied to anyway, many times over the years when I've listened to desperate stories of need. I'm sure that some of what I've been able to give on behalf of Christ Church has been squandered and used to support addictions and such. And I'm also confident that Jesus demands that we err on the side of generosity with unconditional love. I part ways with Lupton and my colleagues who have embraced his ideology as if it were the gospel, because it is not the gospel. It is not the gospel. The evangelist said, imagine a brother or sister who is naked and never has enough food to eat. What if one of you said, go in peace, stay warm, have a nice meal? What good is it if you don't actually give them what their body needs? When Jesus and his disciples were faced with thousands of hungry people, he did not send them away as the disciples shrewdly suggested. He did not teach a course on personal responsibility, which certainly was absent if thousands followed him into the wilderness with no packed lunches. No, he said, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. Jesus, who said, when you fed the hungry, clothed the naked, sheltered the homeless, you did it to me, demands our unconditional love for one another, especially those in need of our charity. The greatest form of love. The greatest form of love. Paul said, charity, often translated love, but the same Greek word that we use for love in 1 Corinthians 13, that chapter we all adore, is also the word for charity. And actually, charity, in some scholars' minds, probably a more accurate translation. So Paul said, charity is not resentful. It's not arrogant or boastful or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the right. Charity, Paul said, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. He said, faith, hope, and charity abide, and the greatest of these is charity. And so, while I agree that building transformative relationships is a key in helping people move from poverty and homelessness to sustainable circumstances, I am first called to give them what their body needs. If that means helping with their utility bill to stay warm or keep the water on, so be it. If that means handing out clean socks and toiletries and offering space for the homeless once a week during the coldest months of the year, so be it. If that means filling food pantries and clothing rooms with fresh new food and clean, gently used clothing, so be it. If that means handing someone a few dollars to get some Popeye's chicken, so be it. The gospel demands we give without condition. That we give without condition. And that's precisely what the author of James was addressing in the second chapter, part of which we read today. As a turn of the second century evangelist, the writer was refuting the claims of a sect of Jesus followers who were known as the Gnostics, who believed the human body was irredeemably sinful and does not matter to our life of faith. The only importance for the Gnostics was what happens to them after they die, and whether or not they go to heaven. Sound familiar to you? James makes the opposite claim and asserts that what happens with our earthly bodies matters, especially in terms of justice. Earlier in the second chapter, the evangelist warns, you do well when you really fulfill the royal law found in Scripture. Love your neighbor as yourself. But when you show favoritism, you are committing a sin, and by that same law, you are exposed as a lawbreaker. Charity or love enacted toward a brother or sister in need that discriminates because of social status, the poor or wealthy in the letter of James, on race or ethnicity, native language, gender identity, sexual orientation, or any other attribute or label you can think of, any charity that discriminates is truly a toxic charity. Is truly a toxic charity. When our prejudice toward another refuses to do the most good for someone, we have failed the second great commandment of loving our neighbor as ourselves. When our prejudice refuses to acknowledge the truth that our economic and social systems do not work for everyone, and therefore seeks to eliminate social safety nets like child care subsidies for undercompensated working parents, or add unrealistic work requirements to Medicaid when most recipients are working already, are elderly or disabled or children, while we act to increase corporate welfare for those who already have more than enough so that they can buy back more stock, we are doing exactly what James warns us against. What James warns us against. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if we say we have faith but do not have works? The good news is God's grace is sufficient for our brokenness. God's mercy overrules our judgments. God's gift of salvation is truly a free gift of charitable love. As one commentator I read this week wrote, God's grace ought to prompt us toward good works, not as a way of earning our salvation, as if we could do that, but to demonstrate the power of our salvation in our own lives for those in need. So friends, let all that we do demonstrate the power of God's grace to transform us from lives determined by greed to lives of generosity, from selfishness to selflessness, from judgment to mercy, from hard-heartedness to charity and love. Amen.